And if you appreciate award-winning taste, you won't want to miss the premiere of a new 13-course series, Dining in France. Pierre Salinger is your host, beginning Thursday evening at 7.
Presentation of this program is made possible by a grant from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.
Rosetta, I love you.
Hello, I'm Robert Guillame. As a youngster, I used to love to go to the movies. And like all youngsters, I was fascinated by the images and characters I saw there. For me, there was nothing better than escaping into a dark theater, into a world of make-believe. But as I grew up, I came to realize that in this world of make-believe, this world of adventure, laughs, and happy endings, blacks were permitted to play only certain types of roles and characters, mostly servants and Pullman porters. American film became a mirror for American life, and the image of blacks reflected in that mirror was often distorted. But some blacks, using their creativity and imagination, transcended these stereotypes, making a unique and significant contribution to American film. For the next hour, we are going to explore the history of blacks in American film by examining the careers of 5 film stars chosen for the pivotal role each played. Step and Fetchit, though criticized, became Hollywood's first black star. Hattie McDaniel, despite consistent typecasting as a maid, rose to Oscar-winning stardom. Bill Robinson, acclaimed as the world's greatest tap dancer, was both a Broadway and Hollywood star. Dorothy Dandridge, the screen's hottest black sex symbol of the 1950s. Sidney Poitier, with sensitivity and strength, he became Hollywood's first black screen hero. Each of these performers have brought an essential element to their creative work, passion. And our story is as much about the creative passion of these 5 stars as it is about their memorable contribution to American film. In the early 1930s, the best-known and most successful black actor working in Hollywood was Stepin Fetchit. He was the movie's first distinctive black personality.
You know, there's been a heap of argument around town about this here whale. And Professor Marvel, now he claims that it's the very identical whale that swallowed Jonah.
Well, it looks old enough to be.
Yes, and look here at the size of this here mouth.
Ain't nobody in here.
Thunderation.
Nobody in here, white folks.
Holy Moses.
Moses, nothing. Say, that's Jonah.
I'll wait for the doctor, and I just...
Well, come on out of there now. There ain't nobody gonna harm you. What you doing in there?
Nothing. I was just thought you thought I was Mr. Professor.
Hey, say, wait a minute here, Roof. You know, I got an idea. See what you think of this, Fleety? What do you say? You want to get your money out of this, don't you?
Sure do.
What do you say you let me take this on the Claremont Queen, and I'll soon have your money back. And then we can get Duke that appeal lawyer, too.
Well, I don't see how nobody can kick about that.
Do you go with this?
Yes, I work there. I play the banjo and the mouth organ and the calliope.
Calliope?
Yes, I'm all...
What's your name?
I was baptized David begat Solomon.
David beget what?
David begat Solomon, but I changed it to George Lincoln Washington.
Well, now listen, if you're going with me, we're going to stick right to the Bible. You are Jonah.
Stepin Fetchit was born Lincoln Theodore Monroe Andrew Perry in 1892. He was named after 4 American presidents. A devout Catholic, he had first hoped to become a priest, but before long he turned to vaudeville. And during the early 1920s, if you wanted to become a performer, vaudeville was the place to get started.
When I was on the road with him, I said, Step, let's rehearse. We've got to get some line. You don't need nothing. And I really didn't. The minute I would come out and I'd do a short monologue and I would introduce Step, the minute he'd hit the stage, he didn't have to say anything.
Fetchit came to Hollywood in the late 1920s. The reputation of this suburb of Los Angeles had already assumed mythic proportions. For the American public, the name Hollywood had become synonymous with motion pictures. It had ceased being just a geographical setting. Hollywood had become a state of mind, and Fetchit fit in perfectly with the Hollywood mentality. In 1927, director John Stahl was preparing to film In Old Kentucky. Fetchit heard there was a part in it for a black handyman and visited Stahl's office.
We were looking for a black, in those days, Negro, to play a very important part. Looked high and low, couldn't find the person. One day, Stahl was off at lunch, and I was in the office. The door opened, and in walked this fellow who said, I hear you've been looking for somebody, and I'm the one you're looking for. And I looked up, and he was the one we were looking for. I said, what's your name? He said, Stepin Fetchit. I said, sit right down there, don't go away. I went out and got John Stahl and said, come on quickly. The guy that you've been looking for has come into the office. And that was his start.
While on screen, he seldom seemed to have any sense, Fetchit, the performer, was in complete control of his stylized characterization.
Stepin Fetchit really represented a kind of survival technique that we did use, and perhaps at that time we were unwilling to look at or unwilling to have shown. And it probably didn't come off screen as a survival style because of the people who were using it. They were, in fact, using it for their own best ends. And so I suppose we reacted negatively to that. But I think Lincoln Perry has been much maligned.
During the same year that Fetchit made his screen debut, 1927, Hollywood's first talking picture, The Jazz Singer, was released. As the decade of the Roaring '20s came to a close, Hollywood and America went through major changes. Silent motion pictures were replaced by what came to be known as the talkies. And in 1929, the stock market fell. The economic landscape was bleak, and Americans looked to the dream merchants of Hollywood for comic relief from the harsh financial realities of the day. In Hollywood films, this much-needed comic relief was provided primarily by black servants.
What were you doing in that closet?
I went in there to get me some air.
Oh, you go into a dark closet to get air, do you?
Yeah. You see, I'm a man who likes to change his air. I get tired of that regular old air.
By 1934, Fetchit was already a Hollywood legend. At a time when contracts for black performers were unheard of, Fetchit was signed, then dropped, then incredibly re-signed by Fox Pictures.
What you doing with my hot water?
Just trying to put some humor back in my feet. They even got my whole body this good.
Humor nothing. I'm fixing to wash dishes with that water.
That's all right. Well, I'm killing 2 stones with 1 bird.
How?
The dishes in there, too. I ain't
Don't give me my dishes.
You leave a bowl.
Will Rogers, the popular humorist and one of Fox Studios' biggest stars, insisted that the studio keep Fetchit under contract. Fetchit appeared in 4 films with Rogers, becoming the first black to receive featured billing and have special scenes written into pictures for him. In Judge Priest, directed by John Ford, they became the first well-known interracial comedy team in film.
Well, plague take you, I thought I told you to stay away from that bed.
But Judge, it got hung up on
Yeah, you got my coat on there, too.
Yes, but this old skunk coat.
Skunk coat?
I mean possum.
What do you mean, possum?
Rabbit.
Rabbit? Say, listen, every inch of that is raccoon. Better be raccoon. I took it off a rich Yankee. Now,
They call them Coons. Well, that goes back to minstrel and slavery times, where they used the word for all black people. Coonshine and so forth and so on. But, in fact, they'll still use it today if they get a chance. But things are quite different now. But, as I see it, why, I'm just glad that the people had an opportunity to be upon the big screen.
Stepin Fetchit, now that's one of the people who makes my skin crawl. I never could stand Stepin Fetchit. It was, to me, he was beyond belief as a comedian. He wasn't funny. A true stereotype. The first time I ever saw him, I thought to myself, what is he doing? Why is he doing this? I never saw anybody act like this in my life. So I don't really hold much of a brief for Stepin Fetchit as anything other than an aberration in the history of black performers.
Fetchit led a flamboyant private life. Stories circulated about his 6 houses, his Chinese servants, his lavish parties, his 12 cars.
What I remember very vividly is my father and others laughing, just cracking up on the floor, talking about the time Stepin Fetchit would come down Central Avenue in his long Duesenberg with a lion in the back seat, sitting up like a little cat, a dog. And he would have his bowler on and dressed to the T, just driving down the street.
Fetchit's antics eventually destroyed him. During the late 1930s, he fell into obscurity. Studio executives tired of his eccentric personality. He often held up production to attend a morning Catholic mass, and the self-demeaning characters he played alienated him from black audiences. No one could have predicted that this actor, who gave the appearance of being slow-witted, simple-minded, and confused, would become such a star. But during the early 1930s, Fetchit went far beyond anyone's predictions or expectations, and did so brilliantly in his own inspired way. He opened studio doors to blacks in Hollywood. Willie Best and Mantan Moreland are among those who elaborated on his techniques and gained popularity. Appearing with Fetchit and Judge Priest was another immensely talented black performer who was initially told by a powerful casting agent she would never reach stardom, Hattie McDaniel.
Hey, cut them monkey shine.
Before 1930, there was no casting situation. Central Casting didn't handle them, so they created one. They hired a guy named Mr. Butler. They call him Mr. Butler. So if you wanted a job, black, you wanted a job in this town, you had to go through Mr. Butler. Well, naturally, he stuck it to people. And when Hattie went to him, he said, "You're too black and ugly. You're never gonna make anything in film," you know, that kind of thing. But she proved him wrong.
Hattie McDaniel, like Stepin Fetchit, came to Hollywood in the late 1920s. Born in Wichita, Kansas, the 4th child of a Baptist minister.
Got to take 'em in the house, yes, Lord.
She struggled upward from roles in road companies to appearances on radio, and then finally, parts in movies. She played the fussy, boisterous maid in film after film, using the stereotyped figure to display her remarkable talent and affinity for pure, broad comedy.
Aunt Josie, I got stomach trouble.
Lord help you, white child. What them years has been feeding you?
Not a darn thing, that's the trouble. What have you got for supper?
Mr. Rome, you stay here. Us is going to kill the half-deafness loose in the gravy and grits and waffles. Don't you worry none, honey. You's home now. Miss Rose.
Heavy-set and dark-skinned, she had the physical characteristics that Hollywood associated with the role of domestics. Often criticized for playing the part of a maid, she answered her critics just as tartly as she might have answered an employer in one of her films. Why should I complain about making $700 a week playing a maid? If I didn't, I'd be making $7 a week actually being one.
Hattie never really wanted to be a mammy as such, but she liked being Earth Mother. And there is a difference. That's not a put down or an embarrassment to other blacks.
She was able to transcend the stereotype and the cliche and to give that character the dimension that was inherent in the material.
In Joseph von Sternberg's 1932 film, Blonde Venus, McDaniel plays a domestic who befriends as well as protects Marlene Dietrich. Here she investigates a detective looking for Dietrich.
Howdy, boss.
Hello, Annie.
Looking for somebody?
No, nobody in particular. Why?
Well, I knows everybody in the street and thought maybe I might be able to help you out.
No, I wasn't looking for anybody, just browsing around. Thanks, just the same, just browsing around.
Yes, sir, boss, I can see that, just browsing around.
What did he say, Cora?
He says he ain't looking for nobody, he's just browsing around. But he can't fool me, no, sir. That white man's up to something.
In 1937, McDaniel appeared in 7 films. Her most interesting role was as Rosetta in Saratoga. The film starred 2 of the biggest sex symbols of the 30s, Clark Gable and Jean Harlow. It included special scenes to play on McDaniel's rich humor and infectious charm. Most important in Saratoga, Hattie McDaniel's character emerged as a mother figure to Jean Harlow.
Will you tell Mr. Bradley I'd like to see him?
I sure will. You've got a pencil smudge on your chin, honey.
Well, what of it?
Don't you want to look pretty for Mr. Bradley?
Why should I?
I'd fix up for him anytime. If it's only the right color, I'd marry him.
Hattie had such a fine rapport with Clark Gable that audiences frequently lost sight of their master-servant roles.
Yeah, I know. That brat needs a good spanking.
Oh, she don't mean nothing, Mr. Duke. That's just her way.
Rosetta, I love you.
She emerged as the one servant of the era to speak her mind fully. This is especially true of the role she played in David O. Selznick's Gone with the Wind. Hattie is an all-seeing, all-knowing guardian of the Tara Mansion. In one of the film's most dramatic moments, she reveals her concern for Rhett Butler after the accidental death of his only child.
It's Mr. Rhett I was worried about. He done lost his mind these last couple of days.
Oh, no, Mammy, no.
I ain't never seen no man, black or white, sit at the store on any child. When Dr. Meade say her neck broke, Mr. Red grabbed his gun and run out there and shoot that poor pony. And for a minute, I think he wanted to shoot himself.
Oh, poor Captain Butler.
And yes, and Miss Scarlett, she called him a murderer for teaching that child to jump. She said, you give me my baby what you killed. And then he said, Miss Scarlett ain't never cared nothing about Miss Buckley. It like to turn my blood cold, the things they say to one another.
Her powerful performance won Hattie McDaniel an Oscar for Best Supporting Actress. Thus, in 1940, she became the first black person to receive a nomination and the first to win an Academy Award. Ironically, her acceptance speech was written by the studio.
Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Science, fellow members of the motion picture industry, and honored guests. This is one of the happiest moments of my life. And I want to thank each one of you who had a part in selecting me for one of the awards. For your kindness, it has made me feel very, very humble. And I shall always hold it as a beacon for anything that I may be able to do in the future. I sincerely hope I shall always be a credit to my race and to the motion picture industry. My heart is too full to tell you just how I feel. And may I say thank you, and God bless you.
Olivia de Havilland told me this story about when Hattie McDaniel's name was announced as being the winner. Olivia de Havilland got so upset. They were both in the same category for supporting actress. She was 23 at the time. And she ran into the kitchen of the hotel crying. And Mrs. Selznick followed her in and gave her a really rough talking to, saying that, how dare you be upset that this woman has won? It's probably the only time in her life she'll ever have a chance like this. She's reached the pinnacle of her career. She's worked for 40 years to do this sort of thing, and here you are crying your heart out because you've lost to this woman. You ought to be ashamed of yourself. So I think that was pretty, as Olivia de Havilland mentioned it to me, it was one of her early learning experiences, she called it.
In all her best movies, Hattie McDaniel refused to accept typical domesticity. Given the racial segregation of the period, just talking back was a triumph. Southern filmgoers complained that she acted too familiar with her white employers. In the 1940s, film producers softened the high-spirited McDaniel screen persona. Before her death in the early 1950s, she left the movies to play the wild and witty Maid Beulah on radio. The enthusiasm black actors poured into their characters seemed often to parallel their own gratitude that at long last blacks were working in films. Without scripts to aid them, and generally without even sympathetic directors or important roles, many black actors in American films were compelled to rely on their own ingenuity to create memorable characters. Butterfly McQueen, Ethel Waters, Dooley Wilson, Eddie Rochester Anderson, and Lee Whipper, to mention only a few. Occasionally, during the 1930s, black actresses were given parts that allowed them to display their dramatic talents. Universal's Imitation of Life cast Louise Beavers as the mother of Freddie Washington, a troubled young woman who rejects her mother's point of view that blacks have to accept being second-class citizens.
Viola, won't you be a good child like you can be, darling? And do something for your mammy?
Oh, don't say Mammy.
Look here, baby. You go down south to one of them high-tone colleges where only the high tone goes. Wouldn't you do that for me, honey?
A Negro school?
Ain't nothing to be ashamed of, daughter dear. Meet your cross halfway. 'Twon't be near so heavy. Go amongst your own. Quit battling. Your little head's sore now from butting against stone walls. Open up and say, Lord, I bows my head. He made you black, honey. Don't be telling him his business. Accept it, honey. Do that for your mammy, your mother, dear.
The Hollywood star-making system was in full evidence when it cast Bill Bojangles Robinson opposite America's favorite child actress, Shirley Temple. She occupied a unique position in relation to blacks in films. Of all leading ladies to be waited on by blacks, none was more dutifully attended to than Little Miss Curlytop. In the early 30s, she and Will Rogers were Fox Studios' most valuable assets. Robinson co-starred with her in 4 films. Their popularity surpassed even Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers. Robinson came to films after a legendary career as a tap dancer. Fred Astaire called him the greatest dancer of all time. The grandson of a slave, he was said to have never had a dancing lesson in his life. At the age of 8, he ran away from home in Richmond, Virginia, and earned his living by dancing for pennies in saloons and on streets. He made his debut in show business with a vaudeville act and went on to become a Broadway star. Unlike Stepin Fetchit, Robinson's on-screen characters were articulate, reliable, confident, and cool. Very cool.
Well, well, this is certainly what I call a coincidence.
Yes, I know. You never expected to see me.
Say, look here, how is Miss Elizabeth?
Oh, her health is all right, but I think she worries about Mr. Jack. He better come home pretty soon.
What you mean you ain't got no money? M-O-N-I-E?
Not only that, we's most out of F-U-D-E.
That's too bad. Look here. Wouldn't they K-U-N-E-L give a little L-O-N-E?
You know Miss Elizabeth wouldn't take nothing from him. Why, before she'd do that, she'd go to the, P-O-H-O-S.
P-O-H-O-S?
Yeah, sure. Ain't you got no education? The poorhouse.
Oh, no.
Yes, indeed.
Bill Robinson, of course, the marvelous performer who had been very successful on the stage before, so he came to film already a big success, had a nonchalant way about him and an air of, he had a dignity, and he had a blending quality that Hollywood liked because he would not give offense. He was also certainly not the step-and-fetch-it type whatsoever.
While Robinson and Temple were making their first feature film together, The Little Colonel, Robinson taught her his popular staircase dance routine. The resulting scene became famous.
Look here. Will you go if I show you a brand new way how to go upstairs?
How could there be a new way to go upstairs?
Now, you just watch. I went to the market to get some beef. And the beef so tough, and I couldn't get enough. I paid $5 for a great big hog, and the hog so fat, and I couldn't get back.
Robinson's greatest gift as a dancer in the movies was that his sense of rhythm and his physical dexterity combined to convey an optimistic or copacetic air. As he tapped across the room, his sheer joy made audiences think that life, after all, was what you made it. The real significance of a Bill Robinson performance was therefore never as much as in what he had to say as in what he came to represent. In his films with Shirley Temple, he understood her problems, sympathized with them, and ultimately made a decisive move to aid her. In 1939, as his young co-star matured and they did fewer films together, Bill Robinson's popularity declined. He wisely returned to the theater and to Broadway stardom. In 1943, Hollywood brought him back to play the lead in Stormy Weather. By the very nature of its all-black cast, Fox's Stormy Weather and MGM's Cabin in the Sky were exceptions to the rules of 1940s Hollywood movie-making. Robinson coined the word copacetic, which seemed to mean everything was just fine and dandy. But in this scene from Stormy Weather with Cab Calloway and Dooley Wilson, Robinson's character knows nothing about talking jive.
Why, tain't game. Well, if this ain't a solid cinder. What do you know, Pop? Give me some skin. Mella. Now lay your racket, Jack.
Say, this cat ain't hep to the jive. Stop beating up your chops to him.
Now, ain't that a brain down? That's the wrong riff, Jack.
Say, what in the devil are you two fools talking about?
We're talking jive. He says he's glad to see you and he wants to shake your hand.
Solid.
Righteous.
Crazy.
In Stormy Weather, a young rising star played opposite Bill Robinson, Lena Horne, elegant, sensuous, and lovely. In her important scene when she sang the title song, Lena Horne's beauty and melancholy brought depth to the lyrics.
Everything I had is gone. Stormy weather. Since my man and I ain't together. Keeps raining all the time. Keeps raining all the time.
Another great beauty and contemporary of Lena Horne's was Dorothy Dandridge. Despite the Cold War and detached atmosphere of the 50s, she infused it with her great intensity and became Hollywood's most successful black leading lady. For a period that prided itself on appearances, hers was a startling presence. Her physical features, like earlier black sex symbols, fit the traditional criteria for acceptability, light-skinned and beautiful. Before Dandridge, Nina Mae McKinney had been the screen's first black love goddess, and Freddie Washington had symbolized alienation and despair.
Dorothy Dandridge, to me, was probably the loveliest, the most beautiful female that I have ever seen on a screen. Black, white, Asian, Mexican, or whatever. She was just a gorgeous woman and a very talented woman. She was the woman that I saw as my the screen image for me of the epitome of beauty.
People always think that when you're beautiful, you got it made. And I will say that in terms of just being a woman, period. They figure that when you're beautiful, you got it made. You got everything you could possibly want, and it's not true.
In 1952, Dorothy was selected to star opposite Harry Belafonte in MGM's Bright Road. She played a school teacher learning to cope with a problematic child. Dorothy revealed a soft, radiant screen presence.
You know, Miss Richards, your class is doing very, very well. Even that boy C.T. is picking up quite a bit, isn't he?
Yes, but he's not doing as well as he could.
So you still have high hopes for him?
Yes, very high.
Well, maybe you're right. There's no harm in hoping.
Dorothy Dandridge came to films after a career as a stage entertainer that began as a child. The daughter of a Cleveland minister and an actress, Ruby Dandridge, she performed as a child with her older sister, Vivian, in a vaudeville act billed as the Wonder Kids. At 15, she and Vivian, along with another girl, appeared as the Dandridge Sisters, touring the country with the Jimmy Lunsford Band.
Dorothy Dandridge and the Dandridge Sisters. That's, I met all the girls when they came to New York to do the Cotton Club show. And then later, Dorothy married one of my buddies, Harold Nicholas. And she was a great person and a beautiful actress. And I never knew that she would turn out to be as good an actress as she did.
Carmen Jones, based on the famous opera Carmen, was the 1950s most lavish, most publicized, and most successful motion picture with an all-black cast. The story of how director Otto Preminger decided to cast Dorothy Dandridge for the lead reads like a press agent's dream, but it's true. Initially, Preminger had thought her too wholesome and sophisticated for the role of a whore, but he underestimated the talent, determination, and creative passion of Dorothy Dandridge.
She got herself a hairstyle that looked like a woman, a streetwise person, and she wore a peasant-type blouse that fell off the shoulders, and, you know, if she wanted it to. And she wore a black silk skirt, I think it was satin, actually, with a slit on the side. And we went over and we talked it over with her mother, Ruby, and Ruby said, I'll teach you how to walk the way some of these women walk that are enticing men as their whole interest in life. And that was a good contribution also. And so we went back, and Dorothy was dressed in this manner. And when we were escorted into his private, vast offices, Otto just spun around, Preminger. He spun around in his wheelchair. My God, you're Carmen.
Shoot. Who's responsible for this?
Me.
Corporal, take custody of that prisoner.
Prisoner?
Interfering with the war effort. Destroying government property. You heard me. Remove the prisoner off that table.
You go for me and I'm trouble, but if you're hard to get, I go for you.
Dorothy Dandridge was a very unusual woman. She was a beautiful woman, a talented woman, and I suppose she was as frustrated as any actress could be who was black. To have the talents she had, and to look as she looked, and not find an open door so that those talents could be displayed regularly and appreciated by the audiences that she developed, in fact, in Carmen Jones and in Porgy and Bess.
Look, can't let that spooky stuff trip you up.
Signs never lie, Joe.
Just don't pay them no mind, Carmen. They're like you. Well, there's nothing you couldn't get. If you aim for it.
How you figure that?
Let's look at you. Got a lot more than other gals.
Not more what? Got your belt on twisted.
I'll fix it.
What's the matter? Still don't trust me, huh? Don't you trust yourself?
Carmen Jones made Dandridge an international star. Her performance earned her an Oscar nomination as Best Actress of the Year. No black performer before her had ever been nominated in the leading actor category. But despite the great fanfare and recognition after her triumph in 1954, she sadly discovered there was no place for her to go. Very few film offers came her way.
Ladies and gentlemen, Miss Dorothy Dandridge.
Thank you, Terry.
Miss Dandridge, a crisis has arisen, and only you can help us out of this juncture.
Oh, what happened?
You know the lyrics to Julie?
Yes, I think I do.
You do. Oh, fortune smiles upon us tonight. You see, someone was to have sung Julie, which is the third nominated song at this point. Arrangements were made, rehearsals were held, and then at the last minute they decided not to let me do it.
Oh, fortune smiles upon us tonight.
Very good. And so, the spotlight falls on Miss Dorothy Dandridge as she sings the song Julie.
Of my own love, and it promises ecstasy.
In the 1950s, Dorothy was a sex symbol for black America in much the same way Marilyn Monroe was for white America.
You could say there were certain parallels between Dorothy Dandridge's career and Marilyn Monroe's career, only because, again, they symbolized something that was very difficult for them to extricate themselves. Once you get into a mold and the studios and the public see you as a specific type, certainly saw Marilyn Monroe as a specific type, as they saw Dorothy Dandridge because of the role that she created in Carmen Jones.
Oh, I think they were absolutely the black and white of the situation, if you would call it that. Because Marilyn had that same longing and search to be loved for herself and not for what she represented as a sexual symbol. Women are, that's a put down for a woman. It really is.
In Robert Rawson's 1957 film Island in the Sun, Dandridge was cast in the first of several interracial love roles. But she never was allowed to kiss her white lover on the screen.
How long will it take you to pack?
But 2 hours. I don't have very much either.
There's a plane leaves for England on Friday. I'll send a car for you.
All right.
You don't seem very surprised. But are going to England together.
Where you go, I go.
She was a tragic mulatto. And she never came to terms with that. Not really. It's so confusing. The color problem in America is so psychotic that she was a victim. There's no question about it. We used to have big arguments. For instance, she'd say, if I looked like Betty Grable, I would be so marvelous.
Dorothy's last important American film was Otto Preminger's Porgy and Bess in 1959, in which she starred with Sidney Poitier, Sammy Davis Jr., and Pearl Bailey. As Bess, she put her star qualities on brilliant display. Again, she portrayed a beautiful but tragic heroine, a self-destructive woman. Her troubled marriage that year to Jack Dennison seemed to confirm suspicions that Dorothy had fallen victim to acting out her screen image in real life.
I told Dorothy that I thought it would be a mistake for her to have a relationship with Jack Dennison. Because his attitude always reminded me of some kind of boy and a girl sort of thing, where he would send me my gifts back, send me my love letters back. And it was cheap gifts, little seed pearls. I said, throw them in the, trash, but he worked magic on her.
Totally heartbreaking. The marriage ended in bankruptcy and a divorce, and this truly broke her heart and just made her almost incapable of performing.
When she divorced him, he asked for half of everything that she had. He wanted half of the sheets, half of the silver, half of the pillow cases, half of everything, half of the blankets. And you know how he divided it? He took a scissors and went through and cut them in half.
The loneliest day she probably ever experienced was the day when she went down to declare bankruptcy. And it was terribly sad. And I was afraid for her, and I called her psychiatrist, and she had paid these horrendous fees for over 8 years. And I asked him if he wouldn't just call her on his own to do something about it. And he said no, he couldn't do it. He said she wasn't able to pay, so to heck with it.
In 1965, at the age of 42, Dorothy Dandridge was found dead from an overdose of antidepressant pills. In a way never before demonstrated by a black actress working in Hollywood, she used her own self-contradictions to fascinate movie audiences. Unfortunately, this brilliant and dedicated performer could not find in Hollywood the opportunity to display her unique talents. Along with Dandridge, Sidney Poitier is the most significant black actor to gain recognition during the 1950s. His career proved more substantial, professionally and personally, than his predecessors. Poitier came to acting almost by accident.
Sidney Poitier is a name that conjures up a lot of things for me, because Sidney and I go back, I guess, to the beginnings of both our careers. There actually was a kind of triumvirate. Sidney, Harry, and myself were very close friends, Harry being Belafonte. And we struggled along in theater in New York, and first of all in Harlem and Little Theater, and the American Negro Theater, and the Harlem YMCA Theater, Little Theater. And finally began to find our opportunities in those few roles that would happen downtown being Broadway.
After minor stage roles, Sidney Poitier came to films and just about took over. His first leading role was in Joseph Mankiewicz's No Way Out.
Just rest easy, boy. You help me so as I can help you. Keep your legs in the same position. Now just rest easy.
Doc, don't hurt him. Don't do nothing to Johnny. He didn't do nothing to you. He didn't even say anything. I was the only one, remember, Doc? But I was out of my mind, getting shot and all. Doc, leave Johnny alone. Leave him alone.
Maybe one of you ought to go in and see what's happening.
When a doctor wants an orderly, he'll send for one.
Well, just in case, maybe
Somebody stop him! He's killing Johnny! Somebody stop him! Stop him! Stop him!
Everything all right, Doctor?
He killed him! He killed him! That dirty nigger killed him!
You shut up. Anything wrong, Doc?
He's dead.
I first met Sidney, I think it was 1950, at 20th Century Fox. I was working for Darryl Zanuck at the time. And my impressions of Sidney, my first impression was I liked him a lot. He was terrific. We became good friends on the picture we made at this first meeting. We've been friends all this time. It's almost 35 years now.
Poitier's rise to stardom in the mid-1950s was no accident. The civil rights movement was gaining momentum, and Poitier was the model integrationist. The Defiant Ones was Sidney Poitier's most important film of the 1950s. In it, he played a black convict handcuffed to a white one as the two escape the law. Neither man likes the other, but before the picture ends, a deep friendship has developed. For once they have been unchained, Poitier comes to the rescue of Tony Curtis, not out of necessity, but out of brotherly love. In 1963, Poitier played a black carpenter who befriends a group of nuns. Poitier's sensitive and brilliant performance in Lilies of the Field was rewarded with an Oscar. He became the first black to receive an Academy Award in the Best Actor category.
The winner is Sidney Poitier.
Mr. Poitier is the first Negro to win such a high award, and the announcement is received warmly by the audience. The winner is choked with emotion.
It is a long journey to this moment. I am naturally indebted to countless numbers of people. For all of them, all I can say is a very special thank you.
I wasn't at the ceremonies, but he came over the next morning. We were living over in Mandeville Canyon in Brentwood at that time. And he came over the next morning and for breakfast, and we had a celebration at breakfast. And I remember that great. That was a great win. And it was a marvelous performance he did in that, too.
Poitier's most powerful role in the 60s was in the explosive 1967 film In the Heat of the Night. His character was cool and calculating, dependent on his sharp instincts as a top homicide detective, and also sensitive to the bigotry in a small southern town.
I was visiting my mother. I came in on the 12:35 from Brownsville. I was waiting to go out on the 405.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. In the meanwhile, you just killed yourself a white man, just about the most important white man we got around here, and picked yourself up a couple of $100.
I earned that money 10 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Colored can't earn that kind of money, boy. Hell, that's more than I make in a month. Now, where did you earn it?
Philadelphia.
Mississippi?
Pennsylvania.
That's just what you do up there in little old Pennsylvania, earn that kind of money.
I'm a police officer.
Rod Steiger's Oscar-winning performance demonstrated his skillful ability as an actor to convey a man caught up in the illogic of racism. Once his character realizes how valuable Virgil Tibbs can be to the investigation, he prevails upon him to stay and help.
This town needs a factory, Virgil. Colbert come down from Chicago to build it. I hear they're gonna hire 1,000 men. Half of them be colored. You know what that means?
Probably got him killed.
That's what Mrs. Colbert thinks. She wants us to catch her killer. No killer, no factory. Well, that's a lot of jobs for a lot of colored people. You follow me?
I'm going home, man.
They're your people.
Not mine, yours. You made this scene.
What do you want me to do? You want me to beg you? Is that what you're after?
Look, I've had your town up to here.
Boy, it would give me a world of satisfaction to horsewhip you, Virgil.
Yeah, well, my father used to say that.
By the late 1960s, Poitier had established himself as one of the top box office attractions in America. Starting with a Western titled Buck and the Preacher, he began directing. As a film director, Sidney Poitier's biggest hit came in 1980 with the release of Stir Crazy, a highly successful comedy starring Richard Pryor and Gene Wilder. Though not the first interracial comedy team, things had changed considerably since the days of Stephen Fetchit and Will Rogers. In Stir Crazy, the white character was silly and the butt of the joke just as often as the black character. It grossed over $100 million for Columbia Pictures and thus made Poitier the first black director to have a blockbuster hit.
Okay, no more hitting.
Did you hear what I just said? No more hitting. Skip. All right, turn around. You want to stay late tonight? I said turn around. Okay, let's get out of here. Come on, Silver. Skip. Harry, I'm freaking. Skip. Giddy up. So long, suckers. Hey, Harry. He thinks he's a horse. Help me. Harry.
Don't hit him. Don't hit him. Please. He's sick. He's having a fit. See, he don't have his poop pills. He's got them. See, where's your fit? He's got one. Vietnam. Please, man, don't hit him.
Harry, help me, Harry.
Skip.
Harry.
Skip.
Hey.
Skip.
Hey.
Oh, Skip.
Hey.
Skip. Skip.
Oh,
Skip.
Oh.
This business is filled with luck, being at the right place at the right time. I think I'm a perfect example. And Sid has had a certain amount of luck, but the trick is to make a certain amount of luck work over a long period, to take advantage of what gets your foot into the door. And that's what a lot of people can't do. And that's something that's, I think, innately within the person. If the person is tuned in enough to know when his foot is in the door and to make it from there, then he's on his own and it's up to him. So there's no one thing you can say about each individual circumstance. Each individual circumstance is different. But there is a lot of luck, and the ability to take advantage of that luck is certainly what gives a career a long run.
Poitier's success as an actor helped to create opportunities for other black performers. While Sidney Poitier's character, Virgil Tibbs, was a skilled, conservative police detective working within the system, Richard Roundtree, as Shaft, was a maverick, a rebellious private detective who plays by his own rules.
Get out of the way!
This film was one of the first in a genre that became known as black exploitation films. Gordon Parks, who in 1969 became the first black artist to direct a Hollywood feature film, The Learning Tree, also directed Shaft in 1971. For financially ailing MGM, this box office success helped to keep the studio gates open.
I've never been offered some of the films that would have been offered to me had I been white. Let's put it very simply like that. I have done one film where the stars were white, and that was Ron Liebman and David Selby in Super Cops. The other films have been, well, categorized as black films. Not that I have anything against doing black films, but I don't want to be involved only in things during Black History Month. You know what I mean?
In the early 1970s, Hollywood producers realized there was a market for low-budget films featuring black talent. While many of these films were criticized, this period represents the most significant involvement by blacks in front of and behind the cameras in the history of American film.
Well, I think it was an unhappy phenomenon. The black exploitation period, unhappy because of the dead end it led to, which found us all still unemployed with no impact or effective ability to move in this industry.
I hear a lot of people talking about black exploitation, and it's a title that I hate. It's something that I think people, white people, have put onto our films in terms of trying to keep it down a level. Filmmaking is filmmaking, period. We as artists are all exploited. Whether we're black or white or female or male, we are all exploited. That's part of the industry. If you don't want to be exploited, don't become an actor, because all you got to do is take what you have, the craft and the human being, the qualities that you have, and you got to sell it, you got to market it, and you become a commodity. That's exploitation. So when people talk about black exploitation, I get very angry. And they start saying, well, those are films that began and they weren't really that good, and anything that was black exploitation didn't work and it wasn't going to sell. You got to start somewhere. When people start talking about Step and Fetch It and all the negatives that they have towards Step and Fetch It, I say, but he started and he was doing it. And when I saw him on television, then I said, yeah, I can do that too. At age 4, I grew up saying I want to be a movie star because I saw other black people on TV.
Unlike the so-called black exploitation films made during the early 1970s, Sounder was intensely warm and unique. an important film that depicted the strength of the black family. Cicely Tyson felt that she had found the role she had been preparing for throughout her career. As the wife of a Louisiana sharecropper, she struggled for her family to survive while not knowing when her husband, who had been wrongly imprisoned, would return home. Perhaps ultimately, American movies will be awakened and invigorated by black artists, the way sports are by black athletes, and the way music is by black performers, composers, and musicians. Already we have seen Richard Pryor and Eddie Murphy sweep the nation off its feet through their comic genius in film. And we do know that black performers can transcend even stereotypical material. This is a result of the creative passion and commitment they bring to their work. If there is anything that the careers of Stephen Fetchit, Hattie McDaniel, Bill Robinson, Dorothy Dandridge, and Sidney Poitier teach us, it is the importance of perseverance. This lesson is conveyed in a scene from Sounder between Paul Winfield and Kevin Hooks.
You know, when I got this leg hurt, I was down in this rock quarry. And all of a sudden, there was this dynamite blast coming at me with the kind of force to kill 10 men. Well, so I got out of the way of most of them rocks faster than the lightning in God's mind, because I made it up in my head just that quick that I was going to beat the death that was coming at me. And that's what I'm going to do with this trouble in my leg. I'm going to beat it. Ain't nothing left for me to do but to beat it. But that's what I want you to do.
Presentation of this program was made possible by a grant from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.